Yo, what's up guys, welcome back to another video. This is a reaction to 11 interesting natural features and locations of the US from Geography King. He always finds just hidden gems throughout the US. I say hidden gems, maybe they're not even necessarily hidden gems, they're just places that stand out, they're really cool to see, and I enjoy doing these reactions and seeing these places because, yeah, he just seems to know his stuff about these kinds of videos. But we're going to check this video out and see. Hopefully there's a lot of places here that I've not seen before, because obviously I've done these reactions before, different types of places that I've seen in the US. But like I said, he seems to find hidden gems, and I'm assuming this one will be more of that. But we're going to check this out. Hopefully you're going to enjoy. Hopefully you're doing well, and let's jump into this reaction.
Howdy, it's Kyle talking about some interesting natural features and locations in the US. With a country as large as this, there are bound to be all kinds of areas with beautiful geology and landforms that are visible. We have swamps and caves and mountains and deserts, and the variety of things you might see is quite large. And here I want to highlight a handful of beautiful areas. A couple of these, including the very first one, are fairly well known, but I mainly want to highlight places that aren't very well known outside of that region. So let's take a look at some interesting natural features and locations in the US. The first place I want to discuss is Mammoth Cave, Kentucky. This is the longest cave in the world. It's currently known to have about 430 miles of...
That does not sound fun. I mean, it's an interesting place, that's for sure. It's not a place that I would want to visit.
Passage, that's almost 700 kilometers.
I hate caves.
It became a national park in 1941, and there have been many expeditions into the...
This is quite cool though. If it's like this, that is a lot more interesting. I don't want to see a cave that can barely fit one human. Like, I'm not trying to see that.
Cave to push
this is unreal though.
And map new areas of the cave that no one has ever explored. And when I say it's about 430 miles, it doesn't mean it's one long path of 430 miles. It's an interconnected web of paths that adds up to 430 miles. It's very much a large maze. Some are large areas, big caverns. Some are little tiny squeezes that only a real small person can fit through. And to put that in perspective, you can go on a 6-hour expedition tour at the national park and you cover about 2 miles. Jeez. What Mammoth Cave is, and what most caves are, is a limestone solutional cave. Limestone is made up of calcium carbonate, and when calcium carbonate comes into contact with water, or H2O, it creates a carbonic acid which slowly erodes away some of the limestone, and you might get random erosion here and there, so you'll get some big passage, a huge cavern you can walk through, or a tiny little hole that only air can blow through. There are many entrances to the cave, including the main one that most of tourists go through, but there are also vertical entrances, including Cedar Sink, which is just a big vertical sinkhole entrance. And as a region, central and eastern Kentucky, central and eastern Tennessee is one of the top caving areas in the entire world. There are 15,000 or so caves between the two states, including, again, Mammoth Cave, the largest cave in the entire world. The next location I want to discuss is the Hoh Rainforest, located within Olympic National Park in Washington.
There's a rainforest in Washington? I mean, I shouldn't be surprised, to be honest. There's so many trees here.
The Olympic Peninsula is that large peninsula across the Puget Sound from Seattle, and a good chunk of it is Olympic National Park, which is mostly known for its big high mountains and its beautiful coastal areas, but right in the middle of it is the Hoh Rainforest. When most people think of the word rainforest, they think of tropical rainforest, but this one here is a temperate rainforest. In general, the description of a rainforest is an area with continuous tree canopy that's so wet you can't really have wildfires there. And this Hoh Rainforest is, in fact, one of the wettest parts of the entire contiguous U.S. It averages about 130 inches or about 3,300 millimeters of rain per year, with about 87 inches or 2,200 millimeters coming just between November and March. In January alone, there are 25 inches or 630 millimeters of rain. And like many of the other forested areas along the west coast, it's known for having huge trees. But it's probably just as well known for how many mosses and lichens call the rainforest home.
Look at that.
One of the main trails in the park is called the Hall of Mosses Trail, and there are no color filters.
Have they filmed any? Have they done any films here? Like, I don't get. It just looks like a place that would be pretty cool. A pretty cool scenery for, like, I'm just gonna say, like, some sort of mythical film, whatever that means. Whatever that means.
There's on these images. This is how green it looks there. As far as I know, there's nowhere else quite like this in the contiguous U.S., and maybe not even in Alaska either, but this is a beautiful temperate rainforest, the Hoh Rainforest in northwest Washington.
It's pretty cool.
Heading over to the Midwest to a much smaller site, it's Toadstool Geological Park in northwest Nebraska. This is
Oh,
located in the Oglala National Grassland at the south end of the Badlands area of the western Dakotas. You might be familiar with Badlands National Park in South Dakota, and this is just across the border in Nebraska in the same general geologic region. And Badlands, what they are dry, higher elevations that are eroded to the lower spots. It looks like they might be mountains pushed together with tectonic forces, but no, they are erosional remnants. The park is called Toadstool Geologic Park because some of the rock formations look kind of like toadstools, and what this is a resistant layer of sandstone sitting over more easily eroded clay and mudstone beneath it, so it eventually topples over once the base gets too thin. But what the park is mostly known for is having many dinosaur and other prehistoric animals fossilized. One of the main sites at the park is the Hudson-Mang Bison Bone Bed. This is exactly what it sounds like. It's a bed of bones. It's the remains of well over 100 bison piled up into one spot.
bloody,
And these
what the
bones have
fuck?
been radiocarbon dated to be about 10,000 years old. So this is probably
Wow.
some type of a dangerous spot for bison, maybe a slippery slope where they fell down and couldn't get out and just died at the bottom of whatever this was.
What the
This is
hell?
just a very pretty spot. You wouldn't expect to find something like this in Nebraska, but again, when you look at the map and you see how close it is to Badlands National Park and the Black Hills in South Dakota, it does make sense. So in case you're thinking Nebraska is just cornfields and sandhills, well, check out Toadstool Geologic Park.
That's pretty cool.
Heading down to the southwest, I'm going to Coral.
Pink sand dunes. Sand dunes are always pretty cool, but there's sand dunes in. Actually, yeah, I'm not surprised because it's on the border with Utah/Arizona. So, of course, but pink sand dunes.
Pink sand dunes in Utah. This is a state park, but it's located right in the middle of a bunch of national parks, so this is often missed, and these dunes are much less visited than the Great Sand Dunes in Colorado or the White Sand Dunes in New Mexico. The park is about 5.5 square miles or about 14 square kilometers, and as the name implies, it's home to many sand dunes. Some are coral pink colored. The sand dunes are comprised of sediment from pink and red-hued sandstone common in the southwestern U.S. So you think about some of the famous formations in the southwest, most notably the Grand Canyon. Many of it is kind of a red color, and when some of it gets eroded, gets down to sand particles, can form up into dunes, and they can be coral pink sand dunes.
That's pretty
These
cool.
dunes can shift about 50 feet or about 15 meters per year, and they were formed about 10,000 to 15,000 years ago. Some of the park is open to off-road vehicles and motorcycles, but most of the park is
Damn.
off-limits to vehicles, but you can go sandboarding.
Sandboarding.
So if you want to check out a beautiful natural spot that's lightly visited in the middle of an area that's heavily visited, then check out the coral pink sand dunes in
Sandboarding must be so much fun.
Utah. Heading back east, I'm going to the Dolly Sods in West Virginia. This is located
I mean, this is in the Appalachian Mountains, so I'm expecting some beauty here.
in the Allegheny Mountains of eastern West Virginia in the Monongahela National Forest. It's about the western end of the eastern panhandle of West Virginia. The elevation of this
I think it's the Appalachian Mountains anyway. It's near.
area is between about 2,500 and 4,700 feet. It's the highest plateau in the eastern U.S. The area commonly referred to
Look at the
as
colours.
Dolly Sods is about 27 square miles or about 70 square kilometers. And how it got its name, it is named after an immigrant whose last name was Dolly, and the sods are just an open meadow found on hillsides. It's very similar to the term bald, which is used in Georgia and other parts of the South. And what this area is most known for is having a unique microclimate that is much more reminiscent of something you might find much farther north, like up in Canada. Many
What
of
the
the
hell?
plants and mosses and lichens are ones you find much more likely up in Canada or even in Alaska. Because of the topography, you can have rapidly forming clouds and fog. It can go from blue skies to almost zero visibility nearly instantly. And normally you would expect to see a lot more trees in an area like this, which is a humid climate and an alpine area. You think of the Great Smoky Mountains down in Tennessee and North Carolina and just Shenandoah National Park in Virginia. Many of the areas that are humid and mountainous are also very green. And some of the stuff looks like Nova Scotia or perhaps even Old Scotland. And to go along with it having a climate much more reminiscent of places farther north, you do have pretty brutal winters here as well. Lots of
damn.
snow. So if you want to see a little slice of the Appalachians different than most of the rest, well then the Dolly Sods in West Virginia, that's your place. Heading
Colourful as
back
well.
to the west, I'm going to California and the Carrizo Plain. It's the largest grassland in California and is overall about 386 square miles or 1,000 square kilometers. Just east of the plain, marking the eastern boundary.
This does not look like California at all. What? I don't know, this just looks like sort of like Scandinavia or something. This is wild. Or Alaska. This is in California.
Boundary of the plain is the San Andreas Fault that runs north-south, and then just east of the mountains, east of there, is the Central Valley,
Or even like Scotland.
the San Joaquin Valley. And with it being right there along the fault, there are plenty of spots you can just look into the fault. Look at the open earth right there.
What?
And to give you an idea of what an earthquake can do, this is the picture of Wallace Creek. This is a dry creek bed, but an earthquake completely offset the channel. A large part of the Carrizo Plain is Soda Lake. This is a large alkali lake. It's about 5 square miles or about 12 square kilometers, and it has no outflow. And lakes with no outflow are usually very saline, like this one. When it's very dry and the evaporation levels are quite high, a salt crust will form along the rim when the water recedes a little bit. And earlier I talked about the Hoh Rainforest in Washington getting about 130 inches of rain per year. Well, the Carrizo Plain gets about 8 inches of rain per year. But despite this area being so dry, what the Carrizo Plain is most known for are its huge floral superblooms. Photographers will come from all around to get images of this beautiful superbloom.
That is unreal.
Certainly it can be better in some years than others.
What the hell? That is wild. And they're just flowers. That is such an interesting mix.
But it's always at least pretty good. But my favorite thing about the Carrizo Plain is just how peaceful it is. You can go and sit out on a rock for an hour and not hear anything other than wind. Okay, from the bone-dry west coast to the humid east coast, let's go to the Great Dismal Swamp in Virginia and North Carolina. Most of it is in Virginia, and the part there is a national wildlife refuge. The part in North Carolina is largely a state park. The overall swamp...
That is cool. That is very cool. How the hell has this happened? What the hell? I bet there are some... I don't know if there's gators here, but I feel like there's going to be some sort of pretty creepy wildlife here.
There's about 750 square miles, which is almost 2,000 square kilometers, so it's a big open wilderness area, big swamp. In 1805, the Dismal Swamp Canal was created to get boating traffic from one end of the swamp to the other much more easily. However, when digging out this canal, it kind of messed up the water flow in the swamp, so you had ditches and berms that are negatively affecting the flow, and it creates stagnant ponds in the swamp.
Damn.
Much of the swamp was drained for logging, and a good chunk of it was basically ruined by industry, but the swamp became protected in 1973. The Dismal Swamp Canal is still being used. It's the oldest continually used canal in the U.S., although it's now used for recreational boaters on the Intracoastal Waterway. It's a popular spot for anglers. There are paddling trails in the water and hiking trails on the dry land. It's a major flyover area for migratory birds.
Wow, look at this. This looks like it's in the jungle as well. Bloody hell, man. There's so many wild-ass places in the US. This is like, you can sort of imagine this being like in the middle of the Amazon rainforest.
It surprisingly enough has a large black bear population, and I believe it's the northern extent of the range of American alligators. It's always interesting to think of bears and alligators occurring in the same spot, but that is fairly common in many...
Who wins that fight, by the way? Let's just say there's a bear drinking from the water. A gator like snaps at his arm. Who's winning that fight? Come on, let's just have that argument in the comments. I feel like that might be a really stupid question because, I mean, is it a stupid question? No, it's not a stupid question. Let's just say the biggest possible alligator and the biggest possible bear. If it's the biggest alligator, I'm saying the alligator's winning because it's already got its arm. That's an interesting one, man. Who knows? I mean, the alligator's very, like, the skin's very thick. But I'm not an expert, so who knows?
Swamps in the southeast. This is the northernmost swamp along the Atlantic coast, and it does get some snow there, so that would be really interesting to see snow in a swamp. So yeah, the Great Dismal Swamp, one of the great named natural areas in the world.
Dismal Swamp is quite a sad name, isn't it?
Heading right into the middle of the contiguous U.S., we're going to Monument Rocks in Kansas. And these formations are in western Kansas, which is notoriously fairly flat, so these things are kind of like Randy Orton coming from out of nowhere. Despite being western...
I was not expecting a Randy Orton reference from this channel, but I love it.
Kansas, this isn't the same type Badlands scenery as you get in western Nebraska to the north. By the time you get this far south, you're out of that Badlands geologic region. And these rocks reach up to about 70 feet or 21 meters, and these are fairly tall formations of windows and arches fairly similar to what you might find in the national parks of Utah, but just at a much smaller scale. However, what these monument rocks are, these are erosional remnants of a larger chalk formation. And this chalk is made up of skeletal and organic debris. And just like Toadstool Geologic Park in western Nebraska, you do have many prehistoric fossils that are found here, including many mammoths. The Monument Rocks area is private property, but the owners do allow people to go on there as long as they're being responsible. There are a few little trails around there, but collecting fossils is definitely prohibited. So if you're doing that drive across western Kansas and you're getting a little bit bored, check out these Monument Rocks. It's a nice break to the scenery.
The thing is, I'm so used to seeing stuff like this in the US. But if this was in the UK, this would probably be one of the coolest things you could possibly see here, in terms of like natural formations. But in the US, you just get stuff like this all the time. So it's like, I don't want to say you become like, it's just sort of like meh, because it's still really cool. But if this is in England, like, the best thing we've got to offer is the Stonehenge. I mean, I guess there's an interest behind that because it's a man-made thing, and it's like all this stuff about how they actually managed to get it there and stuff. But this would be one of the coolest looking places in the UK. Like, if this was here, this would be so much more popular here than it probably is in the US because of how many different places in the US that are like this. It's cool as hell, man.
A little bit bored, check out these Monument Rocks. It's a nice break to the scenery. Going a little bit southwest of there, I'm going to Capelin Volcano in New Mexico.
Volcano?
This is in the northeast corner of New Mexico, not too far from the Colorado border. And from the rim of the volcano, you can see parts of those two states, but also parts of Kansas, Oklahoma, and Texas. And what this is an extinct cinder cone volcano. It stands at about 8,200 feet, or about 2,500 meters. And how a cinder cone forms is you think of a larger volcano erupting, and many of the debris goes into the air.
Is this the
it
place?
Comes back down and settles, and it kind of forms into a cone. So you have the different sediments kind of going down the sides there, and you have a crater in the middle of this cone. That's called the cinder cone. And this volcano last erupted about 60,000 years ago, and again, it's considered extinct, which means it shouldn't erupt again. And this volcano was very prominent in this region because you have a very flat type scenery. It's very similar to eastern Colorado or western Kansas. So when you see this big cinder cone popping out from the plains, it's very noticeable. This area became a national monument in 1916 to protect the mountain and the surrounding grasslands. There are multiple trails at the site. One goes around the base of the volcano, and another one goes around the rim at the top of the volcano. The crater itself is about 400 feet or 120 meters deep, and there's another trail that goes halfway down into the crater. And this is one of the easiest volcanoes in the US to get up close and personal with. Getting to the site is really easy, and there's a paved road that spirals.
Yeah, there's just a massive road that goes all the way to it.
Up to the top. So if you ever wanted to hike a volcano or hike down into the crater of one, well, this might be the very best place to do it in the country.
Pretty cool.
I'm going back east in upstate New York for this one to Whetstone Gulf State Park. This is in the north of the state, but not in the Adirondacks. It's just west of the mountains. The Gulf itself is a 3-mile or 5-kilometer long canyon. At the deepest spot is about 380 feet or 120 meters. And the walls of this gulf are quite steep. It's vertical in many spots. Whetstone Creek is the name of the creek you find at the bottom of the canyon, and that's what carved out this formation. This park is fairly popular for hiking in the summer and also cross-country skiing in the winter. There's about 6 miles or 10 kilometers of trails there. But you're just east of Lake Ontario, and as a result, there's a lot of lake effect snow in this area, about 200 inches of snow or about 5,000 millimeters of snow per year. Many folks visit upstate New York, but only...
Oh, this is actually pretty cool, to be fair. This image definitely represents it in the best way. Man, imagine falling down there. I'm assuming there's been a case or two where people have fell.
You visit the Adirondacks, just going to the mountains and lakes, and miss Whetstone Gulf State Park, but don't. This is a really cool spot, something you might not expect in upstate New York. And for the last one I'll mention...
And what I love about this video, he's literally been everywhere throughout the contiguous US. He's been all over the country. So you got a bit of scenery from every sort of region.
In this video, I'm going down to west central Georgia and Providence Canyon State Park. The park is about 1,000 acres or about 400 hectares and is referred to as the Little Grand Canyon of Georgia. The deepest part of the canyon is about 150 feet or 45 meters, and some of it is natural. Nature got the ball rolling, but humanity is what made the canyon get to be what it is today. According to the website of the park itself, poor farming practices in the 1800s led to this canyon being what it is today. They didn't really go into more detail than that, but it's probably something to do with how retention of the water wasn't used very well, and some of the rock in the area was eroded much more easily by the water.
That's a really cool image. Imagine being there at that moment. I say at that moment, at any moment, just with this sort of sky though, blue skies at least, and this sort of time of year. Yeah, that looks really cool. I wonder how this even like the formation of this over the years. It's so wild.
So there likely would have been a little bit of formation here, maybe a very small canyon, but it certainly wouldn't be like it is today. And normally when you see formations like this, it's going to be sandstone or limestone, but for Providence Canyon, it's mostly clay. And this is located in the coastal plain of the state, so something you certainly wouldn't expect to find in this part of the country. But it's a fairly popular park just south of Columbus, just across the border from Alabama. There's about 7 miles of trails around the rim, and as you see these photos, keep in mind, again, this is coastal plain. So it's not quite Cloudland Canyon in northwest Georgia, but Providence Canyon in southwest Georgia is still pretty cool. So that's my look at a handful of natural features and locations in the U.S. And let me know if you would like me to make this into a series, because there's...
I don't know if he did make this into a series, because this video is from 5 months ago. But I would love to see more of this stuff. He just always smashes it out of the park with his videos, man. He really, like, sometimes you do reactions of his channels where it's just like, it's not as good. Like, you'll see places that will just sort of show places that everyone knows. He really does his research and finds the most unique places. I don't think I've ever seen any of these places before. Maybe like one of them. I'm not sure. But genuinely, I don't think I've seen any of these places before, which is why I love these videos so much. But yeah, of course, as always, if you're interested in checking this guy's channel out, links will be in the description. He smashes it every time, and I do love reacting to his channel. Yes, please make this a series. Please, please, please. Make this intro... Wait, sorry, not make this intro. Make this into a series, please. I did not want this video to end. Please make this a series. Yeah, well, people seem to love it, so maybe he did. I'm not too sure, but hopefully you enjoy this video. And until next time, like, subscribe, and peace.